conversations that I've permitted. Do you want the prosecutor to ask, in effect, leading questions on those two areas so we don't end up with the other...
I think that would be good.
So that's with respect to saying he said he doesn't like people knowing his business, and he said he had a hard time on more than one occasion. He said he had a hard time trusting people in general.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. We can bring the jurors down.
Your Honor, just on this one thing, the conviction, I don't see that.
It indicates it's a conviction from July 2006 that the witness was represented by counsel, which I would understand to be a requirement for the purpose of impeachment with a prior conviction. So I'd ask it not be permitted.
I thought there was a case law that can you presume when it's a felony, but evidence can be shown that it wasn't. Let me check.
That's correct, Your Honor. If there's evidence the Commonwealth has that he wasn't represented, then that's a different question.
Right. In 2002, in Commonwealth versus Saunders, the SJC said that in future cases, a presumption of regularity should apply, whereby judges should presume that a defendant who's been convicted of a felony charge will have had counsel or validly waived counsel, that it is unlikely in the extreme that a defendant tried today would not have had counsel in a felony case. No reason to continue the requirement that as a condition of seeking to introduce a felony to impeach, there has to be affirmative evidence the defendant had or waived counsel. The presumption can apply, but who's ever opposing it can come forward with proof on the point.
Yes, and the only thing I'd add to that, Your Honor, that's true in Massachusetts, but this is a Connecticut conviction, so I don't know that we can presume what Connecticut would be the case in Connecticut in terms of representation of counsel.
Well, the Commonwealth in doing that relied on a U.S. Supreme Court case that indicating that the issue was rendered largely academic by Gideon in 1963. So I think in light of that, I think the court can presume that in the state of Connecticut, in a felony case, in the late 2000s, well, I'm not sure when was this conviction?
2006.
In 2006, that the defendant was represented.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, let's bring the witness out, and then we'll bring the jury.
I just have to step out and get my notebook.
Page 17. Would all rise, the jury please. He. All persons having anything to do before the Honorable, the Justice E. Susan Gosh of the Superior Court, now sitting at Fall River within and for the Commonwealth. Draw near, give your attendance, and you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Court is now in session. Be seated, please.
Yes, please.
April 1st, 2015, returning to Commonwealth versus Aaron Hernandez, indictment 2013-983.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your patience. Have any of you read or seen or heard or overheard anything at all about this case or Mr. Hernandez since I last inquired? There are no firm responses. Have any of you discussed this case or Mr. Hernandez or your jury service with anybody at all since I last inquired? There are no firm responses. Have any of you had any difficulty following any of my instructions not to talk about or in any fashion communicate about or look at or listen to or do any research about this case, anything you think could be relevant to the case or Mr. Hernandez? There are no firm responses.
Please stand and raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that your testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please proceed.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, good morning.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name, please?
Alexander Bradley,
And could you spell your last name?
Bradley,
How old are you, sir?
32 years old,
And where did you grow up?
Hartford, Connecticut.
Have you lived in Connecticut for most of your life?
Yes,
At some point, a few years back, did you meet an individual by the name of Aaron Hernandez?
yes.
And how did you meet him?
I met him through a mutual friend,
And what was that mutual friend's name?
Daquan Brooks,
Okay. When did you meet him?
2010.
And where did you meet him?
I met him at my house, the place where I was living at the time,
Okay, and what
Bristol,
was-
Connecticut.
I'm sorry?
Bristol, Connecticut.
Okay. And the individual that you met back in Bristol, Connecticut, 2010, do you see him in the courtroom?
Yes.
Could you please point him out and describe what he's wearing?
The gentleman, Mr. Hernandez, is seated right there. He has a gray blazer on and a white shirt underneath.
Your Honor, if the record can reflect the witness identifying the defendant. Thank you. Now, just tell us about after you first met him. How frequently would you see him?
At the beginning, When I first met him, I didn't see him that often. I would just see him from time to time.
And when you say from time to time, like, what are the intervals in between the times? Is that days, weeks, months, or longer?
Maybe weekly, maybe once a week.
Okay. And where would you see him?
He would come to my residence.
And at that time, when you first met him, was he going to school?
He was just finishing school. He was preparing to enter the NFL.
And as a result of meeting him, did you develop a relationship of sorts at that time?
Yes, I developed a relationship at the beginning.
And what was that relationship? Just describe that.
It was more of a business relationship.
And what was the nature of the business relationship?
He would call me for marijuana.
Okay. And how frequently, after you first met him in 2010, how frequently was he calling you for marijuana?
Once a week, sometimes more, twice. I mean, it would depend.
And when he was calling you, just describe what quantities of marijuana was he calling you about?
He would purchase anywhere from 1 to 4 ounces of marijuana a week.
Okay. When you say, excuse me, 1 to 4 ounces of marijuana, how much marijuana is that in terms of cost?
Well, if it were 4 ounces, it would be between $1,200 and $1,300.
And 1 ounce would go for approximately how much?
About $300.
Okay. Just describe the quantity of 1 ounce, if you can demonstrate to us or describe it. What does 1 ounce of marijuana look like?
It's a relatively small amount. It's enough to fit inside of a sandwich bag.
When you say a sandwich bag, like a traditional sandwich bag, like,
Yes, a traditional sandwich bag.
okay. And that would constitute 1 ounce?
Yes.
Now, how long did you have that relationship with him, that business relationship as you've described?
For the large part of the time I know him, we had somewhat of a business relationship, but we progressed into more friends than anything.
Okay. Now, back in 2010, were you engaged in the business of dealing marijuana?
Yes.
Now, when you say your relationship progressed, just describe over after 2010, how did it progress?
After knowing him for about a year, it progressed because he invited me on a vacation trip with him.
Okay. How often were you seeing him during the course of that year?
Which year?
I'm sorry, the first year, from the time you met him till you described your relationship progressing. Just describe how many times or how frequently were you seeing him?
At the beginning, it would be anywhere from one time, once a week, to two. I mean, not that often, once or twice a week at the beginning.
Okay.
When I first met him.
And when you saw him the once or twice a week, when you began your relationship, would you smoke? Would you ever smoke with him?
Yes, I've smoked with him before. Well, during that time period, yes, I did smoke with him.
How many times would you smoke with him during that first year, 2010?
Sometimes we smoked when he would come to get marijuana from me. We would smoke, hang out for a little while, and then, he'd go a separate way, and I'd do whatever I had to do.
Okay. And when you say that you would hang out for a little while, what types of things were you doing while smoking and hanging out?
We played video games. That's pretty much all we did when he would come to my residence, play video games, smoke a little bit, and then we'd part ways.
Okay. And so during the course of weeks from in 2010 for that first year, was that the extent of your relationship, seeing him selling marijuana, smoking, hanging out, playing video games?
Yeah, that was what our relationship consisted of.
Did you ever do anything other than that together?
Not really that I can recall. Not too much
Okay.
of anything else.
And just during that time, outside of the business relationship, did you have any, for that first year, did you have any other relationship with him?
No.
Okay. After that first year, I think you indicated your relationship changed?
Yeah, it progressed.
Okay, progressed. And how did it progress?
We started hanging around each other more frequent. He would he would call me and ask me to hang out with him, and there were times that I called him and asked him to hang out. But it really started when we went on vacation together.
Okay, and when was that? How long into from the time you first met him till the time that you went on vacation?
I'd known him about a year, and he had completed one full season in the NFL, and we went on a vacation to Florida.
Okay, and tell us about that. How had that come about?
Mr. Hernandez invited me. He asked me if I wanted to go to Miami with him, and I said yes, that I was willing to go.
Now, prior to that trip to Miami, had you considered him a friend of yours?
Prior to that trip, not particularly. It was more just of no, I didn't.
Okay. After, how long did you go on this trip with the defendant?
Repeat that, please.
Sure. How long was this trip to Florida?
I can't exactly remember exactly how long, but it was less than a week. I think it was 4 days, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5 days.
Okay. And at some point, did you both travel down there together
Yes, we did.
and return together?
Yes, we did.
And after you came back, just describe what your relationship was like going forward.
After the vacation, we began hanging out a lot.
Okay, when you say a lot,
well,
just-
a lot more than we were prior to it. I would go to his house in Plainville. Sometimes we hung out more. I was actually calling him.
Okay.
In the beginning, he was just calling me.
Okay. And when you say in the beginning he was just calling you, how long of a period of time was he just calling you?
For the majority of that first year.
Okay. And the purpose, or when he called you, what did he want during that first year?
Usually just marijuana.
Now, after the first year, after you went to Florida, you indicated that, excuse me, you had begun to call him,
Yes, at times.
and when you would call him, what was that about?
Just call him and ask him what he was doing, if he wanted to hang out.
Okay. And now during those occasions, you indicated that you had gone to his home,
Yes.
and that home was where?
At that time, it was in Plainville.
Okay. Did you ever stay over at his home?
In Plainville, I did stay over a couple of times, not very many times.
Excuse me. Did you meet his girlfriend at some point?
Yes, I did.
Now, during the time, do you know how long or how many occasions that you had visited him at his home in Plainville?
Not very many times, to my knowledge. I mean, I don't know an exact number, but
Okay. Now, at some point, did you know him, did he move to a different location?
yes, he did.
And when he moved to a different location, just describe your relationship with him at that time.
My relationship with him just progressed more and more as time went on. So once he moved to the new place in North Attleboro, we were even better friends than we were when he was living in Plainville.
Okay. And did you ever have occasions to go and visit him at that home?
Yes,
Did you ever stay at that home?
yes.
How often or how long would you stay at that home?
I stayed at that house quite often.
And when you'd stay at the home, would you stay there for one night or days at a time?
There were times I stayed there days at a time. There were times I didn't stay a full day. There were times I just came and left the same evening.
And what kinds of things were you doing with the defendant on those occasions?
A lot of the same things that we smoked, played video games, we hung out, we would just do different things. We'd go out, we'd stay there, just whatever we could come up with at the time.
Okay. And with regard to where you'd stay when you're at that home, where would you be?
There was a bedroom in the basement that I always slept in.
Okay. And in the basement, how much time would you spend in the basement when you were visiting his home?
Almost all of the time we spent together at that home was in the basement.
And at that time, did you develop a relationship with his girlfriend?
Some. We were cordial. We were well acquainted with each other. I don't know if you know how to really describe their relationship, but there was some relationship there.
Okay. And how often would you see her during your visits?
Every time I was there, she was there for the most part.
Now, during this time that the defendant was now living in North Attleboro, were you still, what, if any, relationship did you have with regard to your business relationship regarding marijuana?
There were times that I did bring marijuana to North Attleboro.
Okay. And what would cause you to bring marijuana to North Attleboro?
It would usually be at his request.
And what types of quantities would he request?
1 ounce usually,
Okay. And the cost of 1 ounce would be?
around $300.
Okay. Now, during this time, was he paying you for that marijuana? If he had asked you to bring it and you brought it, would he then purchase it from you or give you money for it?
Yes, he would.
How frequently, at this time, was he using marijuana?
Very frequent.
Sustained.
Okay. Did you when you brought marijuana, did you see what, if anything, he did with it?
Yes.
What was that?
He would roll it and smoke it. He would sometimes store it.
Okay. Did you, when you would bring it, would you smoke any?
Yes.
And when you saw him, when you brought marijuana and you saw him smoking, how often was he smoking?
Very often.
When you say very often, what do you mean?
Chain smoking.
When you say chain smoking, how much, what time intervals are you talking about?
Sometimes back to back, sometimes with a minimal amount of time in between. Other times, maybe an hour in between or not.
So with regard to, you've indicated you on occasion would bring him quantity of 1 ounce,
Yes.
and how quickly would he smoke through an ounce?
Sustained.
Okay. Would you observe how long the ounce would last?
Sometimes, I mean, there's been times he finished it the same day.
And as a result, in terms of the frequency of you getting marijuana, how frequently were you getting marijuana for the defendant?
Upon his request, I would say almost every time I went up there,
And how often was that?
3-4 times a week.
Okay. Now, were you doing anything, anything else, excuse me, for the defendant outside of getting marijuana and selling it to him?
Yes, I've done other things. I've done
Like what other things would you do errands for him?
plenty of errands, yes.
Okay, and just describe what kind of errands would you do?
Sustained.
Service on his...
No.
There's no question.
Just, let me ask you this, sir. Were you familiar with any vehicles that he had at this time?
Yes,
Okay, and did you know of a white Audi?
yes.
Okay. And what about a,
Me.
sir, were there occasionally rental cars that you would, that the defendant would rent that you would use?
Yes, there has been.
Okay. And was one of the things you would do is drive him or pick him up to and from the stadium?
Yes.
Okay. And also, did you also do other errands like getting clothes for him or those types of things?
Yes.
Now, during the time that you at North Attleboro home and spent time in the basement, did you ever see a box?
Yes.
Okay, what kind of box was it?
It was a black safe. It was a small black box.
Okay.
Kind
And-
of small.
And where did you see it?
It would usually be on, there's a bar area down there that the box would usually be out on.
Okay. And did you ever see, well, did anyone ever move that box from the bar area, either to the bar area or from the bar area?
Yes, Mr. Hernandez.
Okay, and where had he moved it, either to or from?
The only other place I can really recall seeing him move the box to was a closet area downstairs.
Okay,
in the
where was
basement.
that closet area downstairs?
It's kind of near the trophy case. Not far from the trophy case, there's a closet down there.
Okay. And this box, this black box, did you ever see it in an open condition?
Yes,
And who had opened it?
Mr. Hernandez.
And when it was in an open condition, did you ever see any of the contents inside?
Yes,
And what did you see inside?
a firearm, money, marijuana joints.
Okay. When you say a firearm, just describe what color was the firearm?
It was silver grayish colored with a brown handle.
Okay. And were you able to determine whether it was a revolver or a semi-automatic?
It was a semi-automatic pistol.
And were you able to make observations about the firearm that led you to believe to be a semi-automatic?
Oh, yes.
And what was that?
It was
Did you-
shaped like a semi-automatic pistol. It didn't.
Okay. You familiar with a revolver?
Yes.
And was there any cylinder
No, there was no cylinder.
or any hammer?
No, there wasn't
Okay.
a cylinder or a hammer on it.
And you indicated there was also money inside.
Yes.
Do you know what quantities money?
No, sir.
And you also described some marijuana in the form of joints,
Yes.
which you call,
Well, sorry, blunts.
I'm sorry, okay, blunts. Is there a difference between a joint and a blunt?
Yes.
What is that, sir?
A joint is rolled in paper and in cigarette paper, and a blunt is rolled in cigar paper.
Okay. Is there any difference in terms of their size?
Yes.
And just describe that. What is the difference in size between a joint and a blunt?
Generally, you can fit more inside of a blunt. They're usually longer and thicker than a joint.
Okay. And approximately how many blunts do you recall seeing in this black box?
Can't remember exactly how many there were.
Okay, but just approximately?
A few at a time.
Okay.
As I've told you, the defendant is not charged with committing any crime other than the charges contained in the indictments. Testimony by this witness about objects that he may have seen inside a box at the defendant's residence cannot be considered by you as proof that the defendant has a propensity to commit any of the crimes charged or as evidence of bad character. If you credit such evidence, you may then consider such evidence to the extent you may find it relevant solely on the issue of the kinds of things that may have been stored in that box. You may not consider this evidence for any other purposes whatsoever. Specifically, you cannot use it to conclude that if this witness saw objects about which he has testified, the defendant must also have committed the crimes with which he is charged.
Thank you. And sir, if you could just, maybe with your hand, show us the size of this silver firearm that you saw in that black box.
About this big, I say.
Okay, and you're holding your hands up. What would you estimate that distance to be? In inches.
Maybe 9 inches, 8 or 9 inches.
Okay. Now, prior to the move to the North Attleboro home, do you know whether the defendant and Shanna Jenkins whether a child was born to them?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have a conversation with the defendant after the birth of the child?
Yes.
And was there some conversation about a godfather?
Yes, we agreed that I would be the godfather to his daughter.
So at that time, do you know when the child was born? Approximately?
Do you mean exact date?
Yes, or the month?
Well, his birthday is in the month of November,
And,
to the best of my memory.
okay. And at that time, if you just describe your relationship with the defendant in November of 2012.
We had a solid relationship. We were good friends.
And sometime in, how many occasions, you indicated at when you had first started to become friendly, you had gone to Florida. How many times did you go to Florida with the defendant?
3 definitely.
Okay. Now, just going to do you remember the last occasion you went to Florida?
Yes.
And was that in February of 2013?
Yes.
And on that occasion, do you recall flying to West Palm Beach?
Yes.
And when you arrived at West Palm Beach, did anyone meet you there?
Yes, we were met by some friends of Mr. Hernandez.
Okay. Now, did you travel with Mr. Hernandez to West Palm?
Yes.
And when you arrived there, how many friends of Mr. Hernandez met you there?
2 gentlemen who appeared to be friends of Mr. Hernandez picked us up from West Palm Beach
Okay.
Airport.
Excuse me. And after they picked you up, where did you go?
We went to a hotel.
And do you know where that hotel was, what city or town?
It was in West Palm.
Okay. And when you get back to the hotel, did you meet with anybody else?
Yes, there were other gentlemen inside of the hotel room.
Did you get a hotel room there, yourself and Mr. Hernandez?
No, we didn't rent a room, but we stayed in the particular room that I'm talking about.
And at some point, did you see others meet, other people meet up with Mr. Hernandez?
Yes,
Approximately how many people?
at least 5.
And during that time, did you hear anybody being referred to as Papu?
Yes,
And did you see the individual who was being referred to as Papu?
yes.
Was he, where did you see him? Was he at the hotel?
Oh, yes. That's
Okay.
what happened.
And with regard to the room that you had gone to, had he ever come to that room?
Yes, Papu was at that room.
You don't have to have my approach you overhead. So I'm just placing on the overhead, it's been marked 393, and asked you if you recognize this individual in this picture.
Yes,
Who is that?
that's the gentleman, Papu, who was at the hotel room.
How long did you remain at the hotel room?
We were there for some hours.
And during the course of that time, did you see any firearms?
Yes.
Okay, and just tell us about that. Where did you first see a firearm?
Another gentleman who was a friend of Mr. Hernandez pulled a firearm out there, and he passed the firearm to Mr. Hernandez. And Mr. Hernandez held it, looked at it, and, that was pretty much it.
Okay, and at some point, did you see what Mr. Hernandez did with this firearm?
Yes, when we left, before we left, he placed it on a chair that was in, the living room area of the hotel.
And what color was this firearm?
It was black.
Okay, and did you make observations of it yourself?
Yes.
And were you able to determine what type of firearm it was?
Yes, it appeared to be a Glock.
Okay, when you say it appeared to be a Glock, what made you think that?
Well, they're shaped a little differently, and the top appears to be a material other than metal. It looked plastic, kind of, the top of the gun.
Okay. So, how long did you see the defendant with this firearm that you believe to be a Glock?
A couple minutes he held it.
And then after that, he did what?
He placed it on the chair because we left after that.
And did you then, when you left, did you go somewhere?
Yes,
And were you out for some number of hours?
yes,
And when you returned, or at some point, did you return to that hotel?
yes,
And did you stay in that room?
yes.
Did you know what happened to that, what you believe to be the Glock?
Not particularly, no.
Now,
Testimony, let me
sorry.
give some instructions. A testimony by this witness about an object that may have been seen in the hands of the defendant in Florida cannot be considered by you as proof that the defendant has a propensity to commit any of the crimes charged or as evidence of bad character. If you credit such evidence, you may consider it to the extent you may find it relevant solely on the issue of whether the defendant had access to this weapon in Massachusetts at the time of the killing, and whether he therefore had the means to commit the murder charge or to arm another with whom he may have been aiding and abetting with the means to commit the murder charged. You may not consider this evidence for any other purpose whatsoever. Specifically, you cannot use it to conclude that if this witness saw a firearm in the hands of the defendant in Florida, the defendant must also have committed the crimes with which he is charged.
thank you, Your Honor. Sir, just describe the size of the Glock that you saw in Florida that the defendant had handled. And if you would just give us an estimate of the, in inches if you could, of what you've just held up in your finger.
5, 6 inches.
And after you made those observations of that firearm, at any point did you see that individual Papu?
Yes, Papu was present in the hotel room.
Okay. And after that occasion where you saw him present in the hotel room, did you see him later? Let me back up a second. How many days were you down there with the defendant?
3 days.
And during the course of those 3 days, did you see Papu again?
Yes.
And where did you next see him?
At a Super Bowl party, a friend of Mr. Hernandez played for the Ravens and they won the Super Bowl. So that individual threw a party, and Papu was present at that party.
Okay. And where was that party held?
It was in Belle Glades at a housing complex. I'm not exactly sure
Okay.
the name of it.
Now, during the time of your relationship with the defendant, did you ever meet an individual by the name of Bo?
Yes,
And what about Charlie Boy?
yes,
And did you ever see the defendant with them?
yes.
On how many occasions?
With Bo,
Yes, sir.
3 times that I can remember.
Okay, what about with Charlie Boy?
2 times that I can remember.
Just tell us about the occasions you saw, were there ever occasions you saw the defendant with them together?
Yes.
Okay, and tell us about those.
There was one instance, it was a Christmas gathering, like a Christmas holiday party type of thing, and he was together with them on,
And where was that holiday gathering?
it was in Bristol on Lake Avenue.
Okay, and when you say Bristol Lake Avenue, do you know at whose home that was held at?
Tanya Singleton's home.
Okay. And had you previously met Tanya Singleton?
Yes, I've met her before.
Okay. And when you say that holiday party, when was that holiday party?
It was around Christmas time,
And Christmas time of what year, sir?
2012.
Now, with regard to, you described some other occasions you saw the defendant in the company of either Bo or Charlie Boy. Tell us about that.
There was another instance, where I caught a flat tire driving back from Mass to Connecticut.
When you say you got a flat tire coming back from Mass to Connecticut, were you traveling with anybody?
Me and Mr. Hernandez were traveling together.
Okay, and what happened when you got a flat tire?
When I got a flat tire, I called AAA so they could come service my car or help me get out of the situation.
And while you were calling AAA, did you see the defendant make any phone call?
Yes, he called Bo and Charlie Boy came.
Okay, when you say Bo and Charlie Boy came, how long after he had called did they come?
It took them a little more than a half hour, I'd say, about a half hour or more.
Okay, and what happened when they came?
They came and he left with them.
Okay. And what did you do?
I waited for AAA.
Were you able to repair your tire?
Yes.
On other occasions, did you ever see the defendant with either of them individually?
There was not that I can really. There was the Christmas party. There was the flat tire situation, and I don't think I remember exactly when. Recall it exactly another time.
Okay. With regard to an individual by the name of Odin Lloyd, did you ever meet that, or do you know who he is?
Yes, I know who he is.
Do you remember the first occasion that, was there an occasion where you actually saw him?
Yes,
Okay, the first occasion you saw him, when was that?
it was January or December-ish at Mr. Hernandez's North Attleboro home.
And what year was that, sir?
That was 2012.
Okay, and just tell us about that occasion. Where did you first see him?
I saw him in the kitchen of Mr. Hernandez's home.
Okay, and when you saw him in the kitchen, did you see him coming from some place?
Yes, he entered the home through the door that's attached to the kitchen.
And what?
Through one of the doors attached to the kitchen.
And do you know where that door goes to in the home?
Yes, that door, if you come in through the garage area, there's a door that leads directly to the kitchen.
Okay. And on the occasion you saw him in December or January, either December 2012 or January 2013, was he with anybody?
Yes, he was with his girlfriend at the time.
And did you see what the two of them were doing?
They were holding hands as they walked by.
Okay. And as they walked by holding hands, did you recognize the young woman he was with?
Yes,
And who was that?
the sister of Cheyenne Jenkins.
Okay. Had you met her before?
Yes,
Okay.
not formally, but I saw her before, yes.
Okay. And just tell us what happened as Odin Lloyd and Shania Jenkins walked in.
They walked through the kitchen and proceeded to go upstairs, and Mr. Hernandez indicated to me that he thought it was rude of Odin Lloyd to not speak, to enter a house and come in without saying hi.
Okay. So when Odin Lloyd and Shania walked in, was there any conversation between anybody?
Between them and us, no.
Okay. And as a result of that, is that when the defendant made that statement?
Yes.
And just with regard to, did you have a further conversation with him about that?
No, I just kind of,
Sustained.
Okay. Just describe how he appeared when he made that statement to you.
Objection.
Overall,
Or,
How
how did he
appeared?
say that to you? What was his tone when he said to you that he thought it was rude, or that he walked in, or they walked in without saying hello?
well, it wasn't in a loud tone. It was kind of a low voice because we were close to each other when he said it. But
you've answered the question.
Okay, what exactly did he say?
did you see that?
If there's anything other than what you've testified to, you can add, but you've responded to that.
Okay. You started to say, did you see that? What is that something that was said?
Yes, he was asking me, did I see how he just walked through without saying hi? And
And I think you've already indicated after that, well, did you just respond to him? Yes or no?
yes, I did respond.
Okay. Now, did you see any further interaction between the defendant and Odin Lloyd on that date?
No.
What about, did you see Odin Lloyd again?
Yes, one other time.
Okay, and on that other occasion, just tell us, where did you see him?
I saw him coming down the driveway. He was leaving the house and I was pulling up at the same time.
When you say he was leaving, was he with anyone?
Yes, he was his girlfriend at the time.
Okay, and how were they leaving?
It appeared, or they were walking towards her car.
Okay. And just during the spring of 2013, strike that, up until your Florida trip, how many times were you now going to the home on a weekly basis?
3 or 4 times on the average.
And did you ever have any conversation with the defendant about Odin Lloyd?
Objection, Your Honor.
See, counsel?
Sir, outside of the conversation you've already told us about the day when Odin Lloyd and Shania went through the kitchen, you didn't have any other conversations with the defendant about Odin Lloyd, is that true?
That's true.
Okay. Was there ever any other occasion that you saw, outside of the two you've already described, the defendant and Odin Lloyd together?
I don't recall ever seeing them two together.
Okay. And on the day you saw Odin and Shania leaving in the car, you didn't see the defendant in or around the area on that date?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, sir, at some point during the course of your relationship, had you had conversations with the defendant about not trusting people?
Yes, there was some conversation.
Okay. And is it true on more than one occasion he had indicated to you he had a hard time trusting people?
Yes.
And he also had indicated to you that he didn't like people knowing his business. Is that true?
That's true.
Now, sir, are you currently being held on charges in Connecticut?
Yes.
Okay. And are those charges in any way related to this matter, the investigation of the trial or prosecution of Aaron Hernandez?
No.
And, sir, is it true that you've been granted immunity to testify in this case?
Yes.
Let me tell you, as I've told you with respect to other witnesses, that you may take into consideration the grant of immunity in assessing the credibility or believability of a witness who is granted immunity. A grant of immunity means the witness has been ordered by a court to testify and cannot be prosecuted for or on account of any matter about which he has testified, except for perjury committed while the witness is testifying here in court. The testimony of an immunized witness should be scrutinized with particular care.
And, sir, after that trip, in February of 2013, you were no longer seeing the defendant. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
If I could have a moment, Your Honor, please.
I have nothing further. Thank you, sir. Morning, Mr. Bradley.
Good morning.
So you testified that you first met Mr. Hernandez in sometime in 2010, is that right?
Correct.
And at that point, he had finished up his University of Florida career and was awaiting the draft for the National Football League, is that right?
Correct.
And a friend of yours who was staying with you arranged for Mr. Hernandez to come over, correct?
Correct.
And the two of you played video games, or the three of you played video games?
Correct.
And I think you testified that for the next year, there really wasn't much of a friendship. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So until sometime, say, mid-2011, wasn't much of a friendship?
If,
Is that fair?
yeah, if that's,
Okay. And I think you described some trip that you took to Florida, to Miami with Aaron in maybe June or July of 2011.
maybe those are the dates. I can't remember exactly, but yes, we did go on a trip.
Is that your birthday around then?
Yes, June is my birthday.
Yeah.
In
Do
June.
you remember going to Florida with Aaron around the time of your birthday?
On one particular trip, yes.
Okay. Might that have been the first trip, 2011?
To the best of my knowledge, no, that's not the first trip.
Okay. But in any event, sometime in the middle of 2011, you and Aaron went to Florida.
Correct.
3, 4, 5 days.
Correct.
And up until then, I think you said that the relationship was mostly just you supplying marijuana to Aaron.
Correct.
And that was kind of a once-in-a-while thing.
At his request.
When he would call you and say, can you get me an ounce of marijuana or whatever,
Correct.
right? And you said that after this trip in 2011, you developed some friendship with Aaron,
Yes.
a little bit more time hanging out together, is that right?
Correct.
And that, I think you said, lasted until maybe when he moved into the house in North Attleboro, and then it became more friendly.
Correct.
Now, he had a house or a townhouse in Plainville, Massachusetts. Is that right?
Correct.
And that was, once he was drafted by the Patriots, that's where he lived. Is that right?
I think that's right, yes.
And I think you said on direct examination that you had been to the house or the townhouse in Plainville a few times,
Yes.
not very often.
Not very often.
Okay. Maybe you stayed over there once.
Yeah, yes, I've stayed over there before.
Okay. More than once, you think?
I think more than once, but
Okay. But the most you stayed there, or the most you went up there to visit at all, was a few times.
yes, I believe so.
And so that would cover from 2010 up until, do you remember when he moved to North Attleboro House?
Not exactly, no.
Okay. If I suggest November of 2012, does that sound right?
I mean, I can't dispute it. I don't remember exactly when.
Okay. But it's fair to say that however long until he moved into the North Attleboro House, the most that you were at the Plainville townhouse was a few times,
Yes.
right? All right. Now, you talked about this time in the North Attleboro house that you saw a safe. You recall that?
Yes.
And you said that it was a small box with a lock on it.
Yes.
About how big was it?
Maybe about this tall and maybe this wide.
Let me show you something and see if this looks familiar. Can you see that, Mr. Bradley?
Yes.
Does that look like the safe that you saw?
Yes, very similar to that.
Okay. Exhibit 123B? And I think you said you saw it on the bar in the basement?
Yes,
And when you were at the house in North Attleboro, you generally hung out in the basement, is that right?
correct.
And you said that there was a silver gun and some money, and you also said there was some blunts.
Yes,
Okay. Now, and that gun, I think you said, was a silver gun,
yes,
and it had a brown handle,
yes.
and it wasn't a Glock.
No, sir.
Okay. Now, do you remember testifying that did you see that gun once?
I believe I saw it on more than one occasion.
Yeah, and was that in the safe the times you saw it?
Yes, I did see it inside the safe.
And there was the occasion for getting that was when he would get cash out of there?
Marijuana, or for the most part, he kept marijuana in there as well, so he frequently went in there.
All right. And now you said that when you were in Florida, the last time, February of 2013, remember that?
Yes,
You said that you met a man named Papu, right?
yes,
And on that occasion, you said Papu was in the hotel room, right?
yes,
And you also said that there was a Super Bowl party in Belglade, and you saw Papu at the Super Bowl party.
yes,
Am I correct in understanding that the first time you told anybody in law enforcement that Papu was in Florida on that occasion was in December of this past year?
not exactly sure when's the first time I indicated that to law enforcement.
Do you remember talking with Mr. McCauley and Mr. Bomberg and Trooper Benson in December?
Yes, I remember talking to them.
And they came down, correct?
Yes,
And they talked to you about the kind of questions they were going to ask
yes,
at this trial, right?
yes,
And Trooper Benson was taking notes?
yes.
And Trooper Benson was taking notes of new things that you said, right?
He was taking notes. I don't know if they were of new things or...
And one of the new things you said was Papu was there.
Yes,
Now, that's not the first time you've told your story to law enforcement, is that right?
that is right.
You've been interviewed, correct?
Correct.
You've testified in 3 different grand juries, grand jury on 3 times.
Correct.
You've been interviewed by police officers on a number of times.
Correct.
And it's fair that the first time you told anybody in law enforcement about Papu was in December of this past year, in that meeting with Mr. Bomberg, Mr. McCauley, and Trooper Benson.
If that's what the record shows, then yes. I'm not-
Okay. Let me ask you to just take a look at this document. And I'm going to direct your attention to paragraph 11. Just read that yourself if you would.
Alex Bradley...
No, read it to yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
And this is a report prepared after your meeting with them on December 9. See that?
yes,
And as far as you remember, that's the first time that you mentioned Papu, correct?
Correct.
Now, do you remember a time when you were interviewed by some police officers and investigators?
Yes, I remember the
Okay.
time.
And remember being asked, did you know Mr. Hernandez to have guns?
Yes.
I'm sorry, the page number, please.
This is the interview, 10-8, page 35.
And do you recall that in response to that question, you mentioned the lockbox, the one we saw in the exhibit?
Yes.
And you made no mention of a gun in any hotel room in Florida during that entire interview, is that right?
Judge, I'm going to object.
So, Mr. Bradley, is it fair to say that on this occasion, when you were asked, do you know him to have guns, you mentioned the gun in North Attleboro, correct?
Correct.
You did not make any mention of the gun in the hotel room in Florida that you testified to about earlier today, correct?
Correct. That's what the record indicates.
Okay. Now, do you want to read through this? You want to take my word for it, or?
I trust you.
Now, you testified that,
John, can I have one moment, please?
Thank you, Ron.
now, you've testified about marijuana dealing, fair?
Fair.
And you said that you sold anywhere from an ounce to 4 ounces to Mr. Hernandez, is that right?
Correct.
And were you getting it in any larger quantities than an ounce to 4 ounces?
Yes.
What kind of quantities did you deal with?
Usually anywhere from 10 to 30 pounds.
And how would the 10 to 30 pounds of marijuana come to you?
It would come through me through an acquaintance that I had.
I'm not asking for the details of who was selling it to you, but how was it packaged?
Duffel bags.
A duffel bag. And was it loose, like you described, an ounce of marijuana in a baggie?
No.
Or was it
It's
compressed?
compressed.
And you testified that you, in fact, supplied Mr. Hernandez with marijuana on a number of occasions, correct?
Correct.
You provided him with marijuana.
Correct.
Did you testify recently that you have never provided Mr. Hernandez with marijuana?
No, I don't recall ever testifying that I never provided him with marijuana.
This is the deposition.
So, do you remember being questioned on December 16th, 2014? Remember a number of lawyers came to visit you?
Yes, deposition.
And a court reporter, correct?
Correct.
Someone to take down all the testimony?
Correct.
And the court reporter swore you in so that you would tell the truth?
Correct.
And your lawyers were there?
Correct.
And they were assisting you, they were present during the deposition?
Correct.
And you were asked the question, did you ever provide Aaron Hernandez with marijuana? Some bottom of page 28. And your answer was, I've smoked with Aaron Hernandez before. I've never been his marijuana provider. No, sir. Did I read that accurately?
Yes, you read that accurately.
Was that truthful when you gave it?
I don't recall those being my words, sir, no.
Do you think the court reporter made a mistake?
Absolutely, because I'm 100% sure I wouldn't have said that. I've testified on other...
So it's your testimony that the court reporter didn't get your testimony down accurate?
I believe there was an error in that. Correct.
An error there. Okay. Now, you've in fact been convicted in the past possession of controlled substance with intent to distribute. Is that right?
Correct.
And are you the same Alexander Bradley that was convicted on July 7, 2006 in the Hartford, Connecticut Superior Court?
Convicted of
Possession with intent to distribute marijuana or controlled substance?
2006?
Yes.
In Hartford Court?
July 7, 2006?
I don't recall ever being convicted of possession with intent to sell in Hartford Court,
Okay.
sir.
Was there a different court that you were convicted of possession with intent to sell?
Yes,
What court was that?
my only conviction, to my knowledge, of possession with intent to sell was in Manchester Court.
Manchester Superior Court.
Correct.
And that was on, let me just show you this. Was that on July 7, 2006? You see is that your
Yes.
name up there in the upper left?
Yes, sir, and that was my sentence right
And
there.
that was your sentence?
Yes,
And this is, and the date of it, July 7, 2006?
yes. Thank
I'd
you.
offer this, Your Honor.
The objection sustained, having it up as an exhibit. Let me instruct you that a witness's prior conviction of a crime is offered and is to be considered by you only for a very limited purpose. You may consider the criminal conviction solely in connection with your evaluation of the witness's credibility or truthfulness. That is, you can consider whether or not it affects the witness's believability and the weight you decide to give the witness's testimony, and for no other reason. It is for you to decide how much weight, if any, to give a prior conviction in evaluating the witness's credibility. You may not consider the prior conviction other than in connection with your evaluation of the witness's credibility. I'll seek counsel.
Your Honor, I'd offer this document subject to that. Now, Mr. Bradley, I think Mr. McCauley asked you on direct examination if you're being held awaiting disposition on some charges in Connecticut. Is that right?
Yes, I'm being held pending trial.
And you're being held for some charges that were brought against you on April 5, 2013?
Correct.
And that includes burglary in the third degree?
I'm sorry, I'm being held on a different charge than that.
Well, I'm asking if you're being held, sorry, Your Honor.
Just being held or just those charges pending?
Do you have charges pending now
Yes.
on the offense of burglary in the third degree?
To my knowledge, it's not burglary in the third degree. I could be wrong, if that's what the record indicates.
Do you know if you're being charged, have charges pending of disorderly conduct from that same date, April 5, 2013?
I'm not positive. I may or may not have that charge pending.
And do you know if you have charges of criminal mischief in the second degree pending against you as a result of this April 5, 2013 charge?
It's not my belief that those are the charges pending, but if that's what the record indicates, then
And do you recall that you are charged, have charges pending of assault in the third degree from the April 5, 2013 charges?
it's not my belief that that is my pending charge.
Now, how about, are you being held pending trial on charges of violation of a protective order on October 4, 2013?
It's not my belief, sir, that those are the charges I'm being held on.
All right. And how about a charge of resisting an officer or interference with an officer on October 4, 2013?
It's not my belief, sir, that that's my charge.
And is it your belief that you are being held on charges that are pending against you for an incident that occurred on or about February 3, 2014?
Yes, I believe that's what I'm being held on, sir.
And that would be illegal alteration of a firearms identification number?
I believe that's one of the charges, yes.
And another one of the charges that's pending against you for February 3, 2014 is reckless endangerment in the first degree?
I don't believe that's my exact charge either, sir.
Do you agree with me that you're being held on a charge of pending as a result of an incident on February 3, 2014 of criminal possession of a pistol or a
Yes.
revolver?
Not of a revolver, but criminal possession of a pistol, yes.
And a charge from that same date, February 3, 2014, of criminal use of a weapon?
Yes, I believe that's another one of the charges.
And do you believe that you're being held pending trial on illegal discharge of a firearm from February 3, 2014?
Yes,
And how about stealing a firearm on February 3, 2014, or possession of a stolen firearm?
yes, I believe that's also a charge.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
So let's start with the last batch of charges, if I may. I think you expressed some uncertainty as to whether you were charged with reckless endangerment in the first degree as a result of the February 3, 2014 charges.
Correct.
Showing you this document, does that refresh your memory that you are in fact being held for trial pending those charges, that charge? Looking at particular right there.
Yes, that's what the document says.
Do you agree with that?
That's not a reckless endangerment is not what I was informed of, but if that's what the record says,
Well, your name is Alexander Bradley, is that right?
correct.
And you're facing other charges in connection with February 3, 2014, correct? And so of the 6 charges, you're saying that you do not remember being informed that you're being charged and are awaiting trial on reckless endangerment in the first degree, correct?
Yes, that's one of the charges I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
Correct.
Do you dispute that you're charged with that?
Not if that's what the record says, no.
Is that what the record says?
Yes.
Now, I asked you some questions about an earlier charge, April 2013. Do you know that those charges are pending?
I do now.
Okay. And those charges include burglary in the third degree
Correct.
and disorderly conduct
Correct.
and criminal mischief second degree.
Correct.
And that all arises from April 5, 2013, correct?
Correct.
And then I think I asked you about an October 2013 incident, is that right? And would you agree with me that you're presently have charges pending against you of violation of a protective order?
I wasn't aware of that, but that's what the record says.
You would agree with that?
Yes.
And interference with an officer or resisting an officer?
Yes, that's what the record indicates.
And those are October 4, 2013.
Yes, that's what the date says.
You may consider evidence that a witness is testifying while there are pending charges against him. In assessing the witness's credibility or truthfulness in connection with your evaluation of any bias by the witness or interest arising out of any hopes the witness may have for favorable treatment in connection with those charges. It is for you to decide how much weight, if any, to give a pending charge in determining the witness's credibility. You may not consider the pending charges other than in connection with your evaluation of the witness's credibility.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Bradley, you're represented by counsel in those cases in Connecticut, is that right?
Correct.
Mr. Pickering?
Correct.
And you go to court from time to time for those cases, right?
Yes, I have been to court a couple times.
And you were most recently in court in September?
I'm not exactly sure if it was September, but that's what the record
Does
says.
that sound right?
Yeah.
September 4th of 2014?
Senior, sign roll, please.